Really, camera? You're starting me out like that? That's kind of not even right. That is not right. I guess it doesn't want. Oh, this focus thing, it drives me nuts. Anyway, we're live. Today we're going to talk about. I just posted a video of the LS3 versus a Coyote. And why are you? Let's see. How will it like this? Will it like this? Will it like this? LS3 versus Coyote, and the reason for that is I had run a video or posted a video previously about a 5.3 liter versus a Coyote because they're similar kind of displacements. And I was thinking, hey, look, if you go to the wrecking yard and want to get something, would you get one of those? And if you did get those two, what would happen? How do they compare? But what I did now is venture back to 2011 when these two motors, the Coyote was built by Ford, basically. Let's see if I can get this thing to come in. In 2011, they were designed to compete against each other. We had the new Camaro, we had the new Mustang, and then Ford introduced a 5-liter in 2011 to replace the 3-valve 4.6, which was a big step up in performance. I mean, it was, more than 100 horsepower difference, I think. So it was quite a bit. And, they needed that because let's face it, the 4.6, a 4.6 3-valve motor compared to an LS3, not really much of a comparison. But the Coyote stepped the game up quite a bit. But did they step it up enough? Did that then new Coyote, did it make enough power to make the Mustang a player against the Camaro? There are other things obviously to take into account there, not just the power outputs, which is a thing that I like to look at, but obviously vehicle weight and gearing and all that stuff. So you have to figure out, hey, look, is that, does that even it out once they're in the car? And over the years, you've seen that they have comparable performance and Ford and Chevy sometimes go about it, in different ways, but they have to make sure that as marketplace competitors that they have comparable performance. If one of them does way better than the other, then obviously that's going to show itself probably in sales. But at least on the dyno, this was a good way to measure the two and kind of compare them in stock trim and then obviously also in modified trim. So the big difference in performance in this comparison compared to the comparison with the Coyote and the 5.3, which, everybody said, well, it's not really, I'm still trying to get this thing to work. Because this 5.3 was that, everyone said, and rightfully so, hey, that's just a truck motor. Yes, it is. It's just a truck motor, but it's the most common one and it was available in the wrecking yards. But the 6.2, big difference because of a 5.3, the way that we run it on the engine dyno, that thing makes 350 horsepower. But a stock LS3, the way that we run it, makes 490. So it's a big difference in power for those two. And then, as we saw in the video, you guys should go take a look at it. If you haven't taken a look at it, the LS3 is rated at a higher power output than the Coyote is from the factory. 426 versus 412, which that's not very much of a difference. Big torque difference though, 390 versus 420, so 30 foot-pounds of torque. And we saw both of those things happen the way that we run it on the engine dyno. The LS3 definitely made more power, and that's not surprising. And not only that, it made more torque. It's bigger. So really, all of the variable cam trickery and and extra compression and things like that, for the Coyote, it helped a lot. It made a lot more power than the 3-valve version, than the motor that it replaced. But it just did not, at least back then, make as much power as the LS3. So let me know what you guys think. But that's really the story. And then we ran them, we compared them stock for stock, and then we compared them after modifications. And the LS3 kind of pretty handily handled the Coyote at all of these different steps. Pretty easy, even with just a cam, to make as much power as the Coyote did, even with ported heads and cams. And there were other cams that we could have put in it, but even when we put the bigger cams in it, The LS3 just was pretty easy for it to make that kind of power. And then we didn't even try ported heads on the LS3, something like an airflow research head, which is really good. There are lots of good ported LS3 style heads, so pretty easy to make, to make lots of power with that. Because let's face it, and this is one of the comments that somebody made, and that was that they were saying that the Coyote heads outflow an LS3 head, but I don't think that they do, because I don't think a factory Gen 1 Coyote head, if I remember right, I don't think that thing flows 315, if I remember right. I didn't think that it did. Somebody remind me if they have Coyote head flow numbers. I don't have them in front of me, but somebody let me know. Can't compare pushrod engines to an overhead cam engine. Actually, you can, and they did. And not only could you compare those two, but the overhead valve motor, or the cam and block, however you want to describe it, the LS3 definitely makes more power, because it's a lot bigger. It's 1.2 liters bigger, and it has really good cylinder heads, and it has enough camshaft in it, and arguably the best LS intake manifold that they made from the factory. So it has a really good combination of stuff, and it made good power. I mean, you could argue that maybe the head port is too big, or that you don't really need that much for this combination, but it did very well. And it also lent itself later on to other modifications. So if you stick a camshaft in an LS3, you can make a lot of power. Hello from Maine. What's going on? Let's see. North Carolina. Good afternoon from sunny Florida. I was just there. Overcast comping. Yeah, it's a little cooler today. It's like in the 60s. Dart next to block. That's what you want. Can't compare pushrod engines to overhead cam engines. Picking up my first 8.1 liter in a 03 Suburban. Very excited. Very cool. I like oranges better than apples. They're both good. Mustang was faster than the Camaro because of the chassis weight. I don't see that I went and looked up the road tests of things from Motor Trend and Car and Driver and those kinds of things. And in all their acceleration runs, the Mustang was not as quick as, it was close, but it was not as quick as the Camaro was. My truck has a 4.6. I'm happy with it. I heard the new V6 engines. If I buy a newer F-150, I want a V8. Yeah, the turbo stuff I think is pretty good. You think of 4.8 heads and a spicy cam. A 4.8 liter with cylinder heads is not going to make what a Coyote does. It would take heads, cam, and intake, and even then, it would. You might make the same peak power. We could make 500 horsepower with a modified 4.8, but it's just, it's not going to make what a Coyote does. Howdy from Vancouver. Is that a local thing? It rained so much that we've changed the name. Been raining here all week. A quick Summit search claims the Coyote intake ports flow 285 to 290 CFM. Yeah, and that's less than at least the peak flow of an LS3. I'm looking at getting a 5.7 Hemi Jeep, all loaded. Anything I should look for? Does anybody have any Hemi tips for them? I'm not really a vehicle person, but if you think about it logically, the LS will fit easier in a swap, much easier to tune and less failure points, but the Coyote is awesome. The Coyote is a good motor. There's no doubt about it. As we saw in the comparison with the 5.3, you can make lots of power. The one thing that's interesting, and well, part of me understands this and part of me doesn't understand it. One is that the Coyotes guys keep saying, well, let's just add boost to them. I'm like, well, part of me wants to say, look, if one motor is making more power NA and you add 10 pounds of boost to both of them, the one that started out making more power is going to make more power. But I have to say, the other part of me, having done Honda motors and run boost on Coyotes, on some motors, particularly 4-valve motors, when you add boost to them, some of them respond better than the formula did. And I've had that happen on Hondas, and I don't have enough experience with doing it with Coyotes to know if that's the case, but it might be. But I still tend to think that you know, if we have a like this Gen 1 Coyote that makes, let's say, 460 or 470, and you have an LS that makes 490 or 495, if we add 10 pounds of boost to them, I think the LS is still going to make more power. Somebody's asking a question about my thoughts, and I don't know what you particularly what you mean by that. Northern Michigan, yep. Let's see. Let's talk about the Firebird WS6 LS1 and how it's the best muscle car ever. I'm guessing you have one of those, maybe down Houston, Texas, waiting on my loaf. On your load, is that what you're thinking? Did you ever look into boring a 4.8 to 4 inches? Yeah, that's coming up. LQ4, what horsepower would you recommend ring gap? You mean at what power level would you recommend it? I would add ring gap if you're going to add boost. You can make a 4.8 into a 383. Yeah, but we're talking about making it a big bore and not the 3.900 that we normally do. We're talking about making a 4-inch bore to see if the bore is big enough, if the sleeves are big enough and thick enough. 500 horsepower 4.8 would be a torqueless wonder. Yeah, I agree. It would not be. Although I think we could get to 500 horsepower with a 4.8 with a fast manifold. So the torque would actually still be fairly good, but not like a 5.3 or a 6-liter. You ever do a comparison of 472 to a 500-inch Cadillac? I think I know how that's going to go. I think the 500 is just going to be better everywhere because neither one of those is going to rev very much where the 472 would be beneficial. So I'm thinking the 500 is just going to be better everywhere. Kind of like a 350 is over a 327 or a 350 is over a 302. Can you put a stage 1 cam and a stock 5.3 without changing converter and injectors? I don't know what size injectors you have. And I don't know which stage 1 cam you're talking about. A stage 1 truck cam? Love to get your hands on an LT6. That's really, really high digit, like really super expensive kind of thing. I know the topic's LS versus Coyote. Actually, the topic is anything now. So I've opened it up to question and answers. So you can ask and any questions that you want about anything. The topic is LS Coyote, but do you see small blocks making a comeback or completely phasing out now that people are digging into new direct inject LT motor? You mean a like the original small block Chevy? That's never coming back. We need an iron head, an iron head 6-liter head. I do want to try one of those. What balancer do you run? We run stock ones normally since most of my stuff is wrecking yards. I have on the 8,000 RPM deal, we put an ATI damper on it. Trying to scroll back to see. I thought that there was another comment here that I missed. Well, instead of bare 821 heads for $300, nice. Low mileage. Is it worth getting new hollow stem valves, or should I go with stainless valves? I mean, are you planning on running really, really high engine speeds? If you're running high engine speeds, having the lightweight valves can be beneficial. They're a little easier to control, but they're probably a lot more money. I normally don't get the hollow stem valves, and I normally don't get. That's because I don't. If I'm getting rec port heads, I try to buy inexpensive ones, and those are almost always going to be the L92s or the LY6s or those that don't have the lightweight valves in them. See a North Star motor make 500 horsepower with the right tuning. Did you already talk about horsepower per liter or average horsepower torque numbers in the video? You had a test comparing ported LS3 heads versus ported LS7 heads, and the LS3 heads came out on top. Why is that? Valve angle, valve size, port size. I had a discussion with Brian about that. And I don't think that, I mean, part of it is that we're changing the intake manifold also. So we're changing the angle of attack on the intake manifold on the cylinder head. I think it's probably valve placement on the LS3 head, which is my favorite. I don't have a favorite. That's why I test both of them. And I think on the LS3, LS7, I don't think we looked at the exhaust flow on those either. SN95 Gen 3 LS53 rod bolts ring gap 88 millimeter, just went 890 in the quarter. Nice. If you went to a 4-inch bore on a 5.3 block with a stock 362 stroke, I'd like to see how it performs with some ported LS3 heads and a nice cam. Would be interesting. It would just be a 6-liter. So it'd be a 6-liter with those heads and stuff on it, which we've run a lot. But yeah, I want to see if we can just make a 5.3 or a 4.8, either one of them, because it doesn't matter. A 5.3, if we did it with a 5.3, that would be a 6-liter. If we did it with a 4.8 stroke crank, it would be smaller than that. How about horsepower per dollar? Yeah, but the horsepower per dollar thing is difficult because people a lot of times can get things for different prices. I love both. I'm doing an LS3 swap and a Crown Vic. Rainy days means days off work. The question about the injectors, the thing that I don't know on the stock injectors, I don't know if there's enough to feed the extra power that you have. I don't remember what size they are. If they're 21s times 16. And that's not going to feed very much power. Great. Now I'm out of focus again. Favorite big box pizza? Was there ever a V8 single cam 4-valve engine ever made? Did anybody make? I don't know. If anybody made that, I would think Mercedes or somebody would have done that as a single cam. An LT6 is cool. I'd like to just look at the intake manifold and look at the cylinder heads and all that stuff, and like to hear one run on the dyno. That would kind of be awesome. Have you ever done a piece on a C3 Ford small block head, like a Yates style head? I don't know that I've ever run a Yates style head. Was there ever a real 402 Chevy? Yes. In 1970, the 396s were all 30 over, and so they actually were 402s. Do you think the 8.1 will come back? I don't think so. I don't see why they would phase one out and then bring it back. Have you ever run one of the older modular 4-valve V8s? Yeah, I wrote a book on those, and I've done endless testing on the modular family. Gelbank says small block Chevy had its generation. Now it's the LS and features Duramax. I think I'd rather have a DI L86. Just picked up a set of 243s for my LQ4. That's a good upgrade. What push rod do you think it will need? I'm sure you did this because the push rod length is probably going to be the same between a 317 and a 243 head because the rocker stands are mounted in the same spot. But it's easy to check when you're putting it together. Nitrous works better with the LS. Nitrous doesn't work better with one engine compared to another engine. If you add 100 horsepower worth of nitrous on an LS, it's going to add 100 horsepower. If you add 100 horsepower worth of nitrous on a Coyote, it's going to add 100 horsepower. Looked it up some, but have you had anyone stroke it, even bore a 5-liter Coyote any generation? Is it challenging to bore and stroke a double overhead cam? It's not the double overhead cam part doesn't change whether or not you can bore and stroke it. That's all in the block. And the problem is with the block, with the factory Coyote block, there's not a lot of room to go bigger on the bore because they're almost touching, because they don't have enough bore spacing. The bores are not far enough apart to actually, put more bore size in there. And then also the block is limited in additional stroke. Guys are making bigger ones, but I don't know how big they've gone. I don't know. I know that they've gone to 5.2, and maybe they've gone bigger than that. But I've never seen a 6-liter Coyote, for instance. Could make fast air-cooled VW. Those are fun to play with. And I like all the guys that are doing the AMR 500 blowers on them. Complexity of the Coyote is not something I would enjoy dealing with. Perhaps if it was installed in something more exotic, I could tolerate owning one. It's actually not that, a Coyote's not that complicated. I got this a lot at West Tech too. They're like, oh yeah, look at all those cams and chains. And I'm like, there's nothing exotic about it. Take it apart once and put it back together, and you'll go, oh, look, we line up the chains exactly like we do on an LS. This dot goes to this dot, and there are marks on all the chains. There are marks on all the sprockets. All you do is line them up, and it goes together, and it works. It's not hard to do. And the electronics all take care of the VVT stuff. It's not that difficult. You think we can ever see an SB2 R07 NASCAR engine power out of an LS? What makes a difference in your opinion? I don't know anything about those motors because I haven't really run any of those. West Tech had a couple of the probably 10-year-old NASCAR motors that the guys from Lucas Oil bought to do oil testing with. But a race head versus I'm sure guys are making, I've seen LS motors, naturally aspirated LS motors, go over 1,000 horsepower. So that's certainly beyond SB2 or R07 NASCAR levels. I have not done any tests on the new Coyote. Are the North Star V8s comparable to a modular 4-valve? Tuning potential is considered. I don't know anything about the tuning potential because they don't do OEM tuning on them. Is Richard's audio cutting out? It shouldn't be. I'll bring my mic closer. Playing Pokemon. Got my first car this week. Congratulations. That's awesome. Picked up an old Pro Mod Yates motor, twin turbo, 1,972 horsepower. Wonder how I run without turbos. Those are really good heads. They flow a lot, and guys can make lots of power with them. Got a 2000 Mustang electric green V6 automatic. Good. You'll always remember your first car. No audio is fine. Probably better, right? Who wants to listen to that guy? Ooh, off topic, what's your opinion on blueprint engines? All the ones I've ever run, I've had good luck with. I have a Ford that I run over and over and over again. I've run quite a few of the Chevys and LS motors, and we did 1,000 horsepower on Chad's. he had like a 400-inch power adder blueprint engine, and it worked good. I ran a bunch of testing on the 540 that I had, and we did 1300 or something with that one with turbos up. Brad, the reason that the motors make power at different levels has nothing to do with the over square, under square thing. It has everything to do with the displacement. And then the dramatic changes are one of them has variable cam timing, one of them does not. One of them is a 4-valve head, and one of them is a 2-valve head. And then also they have, we tested different intake manifolds. 862 heads are the same as 706 heads, so and they work really well on the smaller bore motors like the 4.8s and 5.3s. Only regret is not dying before and after the gear swap. Some people say you lose double digits. What gears did you swap? Looking to upgrade my LS3 heads and cam. How are American racing headers? The American racing stuff I've used has worked really well. They're not inexpensive though. Richard, do you still have your Land Speed Civic? I don't. I actually sold it to a friend of mine who then went out and he and his 2 sons both set records over 200 miles an hour. And so they all 3 got red hats, which is what they wanted to do. So it's very awesome. Just picked up an 8.5 to 1 blueprint 540. Can't wait to get it running. Yeah, they're the 540 that we ran. We ran it NA. We ran it with a blower, turbo, nitrous, the other kinds of blowers. It basically got everything. Do you use a 2-piece timing cover for the LS to make cam swaps easier? I don't, but it would make it a lot easier. The problem is, and the guys that Brian Tooley, the way James does it is probably a better way. But even when you have a 2-piece cover, it just barely comes out. So I'd actually want to cut the cover down lower than they have it. I just would sacrifice a factory one. But then also, especially if you have a truck damper on it, the cam hits the damper coming out. So what they did is they just notched the damper. You could put a smaller diameter damper on there, like an ATI or something, and then the camshaft would miss it. Or the other thing I was thinking of is I just would have a keyed non-press fit damper, just one that's a 0 fit basically. Probably will be on tonight. The other thing that I like that they did at Brian Tooley Racing that I don't do is because this is one of the things I don't like about doing cam swaps is the water. So we have a Mazir electric water pump on. We take it on and off whenever I do cam swaps. But the way that the guys at Brian Tooley did, and we could do this because now we have these adapters from the guys at Mazir, but they just have separate lines running in to feed the block. They don't have a water pump on there. They have an external pump that feeds it through. And we could do that at West Tech, and that way would not have to remove the pump, and it would be a lot quicker. They could do cam swaps because of the way that they had it set up at Brian Tooley Racing. They could do cam swaps much faster than I could, and I really got to where I was pretty quick at it. We could do it in a half an hour or something. You know, running to running, which is pretty fast because I had a good system. But you can only optimize the system that you have, and then you need to look at changing the system and making that better. And they did that, which is good. Any updates on the 2.2? I just talked to Ben about the Omni, about going to pick it up and the things that we're going to do with that. But I haven't run one on the engine dyno yet. Do you believe in super chips, flash pack, F tuners? I've never tried it, so I don't know anything about it. Why is Coyote graph so bumpy? Because it has multiple torque peaks. Richard, Coyote Gen 2, 1000 horsepower, change out the OPG fuel and add boost. I still think the Coyote's better. Steven, you're you are entitled to your opinion, and you should like the thing that you like. There's nothing wrong with that. I fully support that. But whatever the thing is that you like and however you feel, just understand that that's not an absolute. It's cheaper to get high RPM out of Coyote. If that's what you're into. Updates on the marathon. Yeah, I need to get Chad over here so we can do that. What's your opinion on 4-port steam vents on, let's say, a Gen 3 LS? Do you need 4 or 2 the front ones? We don't run any of those on the engine dyno. Usually the 2 back ones are plugged and the front ones just have a crossover, but those are also just plugged. I probably should run those, but I haven't been. And for what we're doing on the engine dyno, we have lots of cold water flow. It's not really an issue. As I watch the feed, I'm watching a snake in the woods next to my truck. Well, what kind of snake is it? Go catch it. My son had a soccer game not too long ago, and there was a snake out on the field. I wasn't there. Otherwise, I would have just walked over and caught it and let it go in the woods. But I think somebody ended up grabbing it and throwing it or something. So I'm looking at tires for my Omni. I got to get some from Summit so that they can put them on the new wheels. Not new, on the Centurion wheels for the GLHS. Well, at least go take a picture of it so you can send me the picture and tell me what kind of snake it is. What's a good stock 5.3 cam? So Sergio, are you only want to choose from the stock OEM cams, or do you want to have a camshaft that's going to make more power? And you can put a Whipple on any camshaft, so that doesn't matter. They put steam ports there for a reason. They do. You want to get all the air pockets out. Looks like a black racer. Yeah, those are cool. Probably when you walk up to it to take a picture of it, it's going to show you what kind of snake it is. And if it's a black racer, it's going to take off, and it's going to take off pretty rapidly. We saw a couple of those when we were trudging through the swamps. Since what I believe, right or wrong, about stroke being a major factor in where power is made, do you have any videos you recommend where this is tested? What is it you want to see? Do you want to see just a change in stroke? Because displacement will change where the motor makes power. So given fixed cam timing, so if you have a 350 Chevy and you have a mild camshaft in it and like a set of Vortec heads and a dual plane manifold, if you take all that stuff and put it on a 383 and run it, the 383 will make peak power at a lower engine speed because it's bigger. But not necessarily because of the stroke. You could do that with bigger bore or bigger stroke, and the same thing would happen. You called Richard a bolt as soon as I got out of the truck. They're smart. They know that everything wants to eat them, and so they take off and hide and try to stay alive. What do you think about sloppy stage 2 eBay cams on 5.3? I think you probably tend to get your money's worth. So any camshaft that's a Chinese copy from, that they're selling for $100 or whatever, I would be leery of. I just don't know about the metallurgy, and I don't know about the hardening of the camshafts or how long they're going to last. Have you experimented tilting an L3 backwards slightly to make the front steam ports work as good as possible? You mean putting angle in the motor while we're testing it? Have you tested any GPI heads on it? Like GPI ported ones? I don't think that they make their own heads, do they? Do they just do ported versions? Portido. Tilting it backwards, say 7 degrees. When we install a motor on the dyno, we try to make it level. We're looking mostly at the carb pad if it's carbureted, or the intake manifold, trying to make it level. It may have a little upward tilt to it. It may have a little downward tilt to it. We're a little bit more concerned about the oil pan than we are about the getting the air pockets out. The air pockets are out when we're running it. We have lots of water flow. There's a guy on YouTube that tested the Rockwell hardness of one of the knockoff sloppy stage 2 cams. It was soft and the springs are super sketchy. I wouldn't get cheap springs. That's another thing I wouldn't, because I've run tests on some of the aftermarket offshore springs, and even springs that we found that measured, because we have a spring tester at West Tech and that measured okay initially, after they've run for like 5 or 10 minutes, the spring rate goes away. I don't know what material they're using for the springs, but they're not a good idea. And then on the camshafts, that's what we were concerned with. Not just the Rockwell hardness initially, but like, what is the when they harden these camshafts, how deep did they go? Did they only go 1,000th, so it just immediately wears off? Did they go 2 or 5 or 10 or 20 or whatever? And the difference between a sloppy stage 2 and a cheap sloppy stage 2 really isn't very much. So I would just, get a good cam. Don't get cheap anything. I disagree with that. Intake manifolds are, there are some stuff that I would get from CX Racing or from Speedmaster. There are some things I get there and they work very well. Like, I've never had a bad, inexpensive turbo. I've never had one of those go out on me. Metallurgy matters. It does. It's certainly, especially with a camshaft. Camshaft, if you think about it, has a pretty tough life. It's being hammered on its whole life. Well, not when it's sitting there. Although some of them have spring pressure on them. Some of the lobes do. Yeah, Dennis, that doesn't mean the same thing anymore. I have the cam. I just want to get the 1218 pack springs. Okay. Does anybody know if there are any mild upgrades for a 6.2 Ford engine and a Super Duty pickup? Admiral probably would know more about the 6.2. I've never done anything with those, so I don't know. But I'm sure there have to be like shorty headers, but I don't know if they do anything. I'm sure there are tunes for them, air intakes, those kinds of things. Hang out with the diesel guys and watch them torture turbos. Yeah, I've seen lots of that stuff, especially compound things. But that's not what happens when you put a turbo in a car that you're driving around during the day. You're not doing triple compound sled pulling. That's pretty serious stuff. Just the amount of work required to swap a cam in a vehicle. Yeah, it is a lot harder in a vehicle, that's for sure. Have you tested a diesel turbo on a gas engine? If that's your question, yeah, it is. Yes, I have. We've run whole set turbos on gas engines a lot. And they make boost and they make power. Got a question. It's not about a new engine. It's an AMC 258 and a 78 Jeep. Shall I ask her? Hit the forums. I don't have any experience. I've never built an AMC. Don't know that I've ever even seen a 258 AMC. But you can ask. What's the point of built internals on LS if you can technically gap the rings and make the same amount of power? You're not doing it to so that it will physically make the same power. It's for how long you'll be able to do it. I mean, we do these big bang motors and that 6 liter where we made 1,540 horsepower with the stock um, rods and pistons. That's not something that I would go race at that level because I don't think it'll stay together. So with forged rods and pistons, if you wanted to do it and not blow the thing up while you're doing it, it's a good idea. From what I've seen, the only reason you need the back steam holes is when your engine sits flat without the nose being slightly higher. What do you think? I think you're thinking about the motor just sitting there statically, and that's not what happens. Water doesn't just sit there statically. Water's flowing through, and so if you have bubbles and there are places for the bubbles to go and the bubbles to sit, they will do that. And so that's why you're allowing that to come out. You want the bubbles to flow out. What numbers are you comfortable with on a stock bottom end Gen 353 with a ring gap on 93 or 83? I don't know. It depends how often you're using whatever that number is. Guys are running them at 1,000 horsepower a lot. Not on 93 that I know of, but certainly on E85. Although I see Morris and Nelson doing pump gas stuff that's 4-digit pump gas stuff. So maybe that's possible. What intake for an L77? What is it you're trying to do, and what's wrong with the factory intake? What size twin turbos would you suggest for a 408 LS for 800 wheel horsepower? Manual car, turning 6,500 RPM. Two GT 3582s would be on a 408 would be easily 800 wheel horsepower. I seem to remember the Mopar 2.2 had a coolant bleeder on the thermostat. Most of the OEMs are set up so that the high point is usually the fill point, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to allow any bubbles that would be in the system, and hopefully they're not stuck in the cylinder head where they can create localized hotspots. That usually doesn't happen unless there's a a ridge or something that would hold the bubble in place. Because you have moving coolant and or water flow, usually all that stuff the air gets forced out, and then you just have water or coolant flowing around. Dennis, what are you disagreeing about? I think my point was that American engines aren't the only good ones. They're not. And the fact that things were made in America doesn't mean that they're better. And that has nothing to do with patriotism. That has everything to do with actually testing. Strawberry cheesecake or regular cheesecake? Why are those the only two options? Why does going lean destroy the piston? Usually they get too hot in the on a lean motor. If you're running it too lean for too long, it's too bad. What happens is the piston will start scuffing itself against the wall and then destroy itself. The dogs are doing good. They're actually sleeping right now. Oh, we do need a pole, right? We don't have a pole right now. Caps in there. LS3 over a Okay, would you pick an LS3 over a Coyote for your swap project? I think I know how this is going to go, but that's why we do these polls, because sometimes I get dogs are welcome, people tolerate. I like dogs much better than I know when we're out walking around. It's nice to have people come up and say, "Hey, I watch your stuff. That's awesome." And I like meeting those people. Most other people, I would rather just go pet their dogs. 5360 swap is a truck nurse cam with all the stock components. A wise choice for a daily driver week with a weekend 5,000 pound. Yeah, for a towing thing, it's a really good idea. It's a good cam for that. Does running rich cause problems? You use more fuel. And if it's excessively rich, you can wash the walls down, but that's not normally the case. This guy's basically saying every motor is good if you got the right pocketbook. I don't know if that's directed at me. That's not what I'm saying at all. So I don't know if this is your first time here or what. Look what Toyota did to our 350. What does Toyota have to do with the 350? My Coyote has oil squirters. What experience do you have with oil squirters in terms of longevity? I like oil squirters. I think they work good. We've had them in Honda motors since, I don't know, back in the 80s. And they're really good. We used to endurance race the B series Honda stuff. And I think that that's part of the reason that we had such good longevity. And I like when the OEM does that with their factory stuff. I have an 02 GT46 TFS head, stage 1 cam, built in 2011. Totally reliable, but I wish Ford would have used more cubes like GM. I agree, and we talked about that a lot with the modular stuff, is that if they had a bigger bore spacing and we could have had 6-liter Coyotes or 6-liter even 4-valve modular Fords or 3-valve modular Fords or even 2-valve modular Fords, it would have been a better deal. 4AGEs, I do like those. 4G63s, 13Bs. Rotaries have oil squirters into the combustion chamber. I don't know why my poll is coming up blank. Does anybody else having that problem? Have you ever tested a VS Racing turbo against the ones you use if there is a power difference? I have a VS Racing turbo, and I have compared it, and I have videos up of that turbo versus other turbos, and I've never compared it against like a really high dollar one, like a Garrett or something. I look at turbos I don't look at two turbos from different manufacturers so much as one being better than the other. We could do that for lots and lots of money, but I don't ever go down that road. What I look at is getting a turbo, and does that turbo satisfy the needs that I have to produce the power that I want? So if I want 1,000 horsepower, will that turbo do that? Yeah. Is there another turbo that could do that and maybe be a little more responsive, have a little bit lower charge temperature? Probably so. Probably a real Garrett turbo would do that. But the other one still did what I wanted it to do and did it for the right amount of money. And that's kind of more how I look at stuff. I thought they purchased that liter size. There's no nobody owns the right to a displacement. So a Dodge Ram was a 5.7. The Chevy had a 5.7. So that's not something Toyota had to buy from anybody. They just happened upon that displacement for whatever all of the things that they were trying to do with their combination. No updates on the Ford V10 project. My tuner says I can make 800 horsepower reliable in a bone stock LS2 pump gas with a turbo cam ring gap. Yeah, I think that's realistic. An LS2 with a cam with the right cam is a 550 horsepower motor. So 1,000 horsepower is really easy with the right size turbo after that, if you have big enough injectors and the tune is good. How does similar size VS compare to the Borg, the old updates? Let's see. Can't remember than high back pressure in the Borg, I think. I don't think that I don't think that you can attribute things to manufacturers. I think you'd have to look at specific turbos that you ran on specific applications and then use that data specifically. I have videos up where we ran the VS Racing 7875 Gen 2 and also ran a Borg Warner S475. Those videos are up, so you can kind of compare those. The S475 was a T6 though, so it's a completely different turbo. The LS is winning on the poll. I'm not surprised given the preponderance of LS people. This is my first road race Coyote. What oil temperature do you consider acceptable? I don't know. I've not road raced a Coyote and I don't know what they are stock, but I don't like to have the oil temperature too much over the water temperature. Back when the Ford 46 was released, I remember seeing an article saying Toyota was in on the design. Nothing new on the L78. I just have to put another set of heads on it. If you add a turbo, it just shifts the power curve upward. Yeah, just if you can add a turbo and have the boost be the same everywhere so that you have a consistent 7 pounds or a consistent 10 pounds, what will happen to the NA curve is it'll just jump up. It'll be exactly the same shape as long as the boost is there. It'll be exactly the same. Do Ford heads fit the LS? I think that the bore spacing is similar. But it would be harder to make it work though. My little 281 is 330 wheel horsepower. That's actually good for a 4-valve 4.6. Yeah, if it was a 381 though, it would be better. I don't have a preferred cam grind or a brand. I use lots of different ones. So is a turbo just adding air? It's not adding displacement. It's not changing the displacement. It's multiplying what's there. Does an 06 LQ9 have Gen 4 rods and Gen 3 pistons? By 06, I think that it already had Gen 4 stuff in it. And I honestly don't know if there's a structural difference between a Gen 3 and a Gen 4 piston. There's definitely in the rod. Is it true that people use LS rockers for a small block Chevy? I haven't seen that. There's a guy here on YouTube that went the other way, LS heads on a Windsor. Yeah, we've seen guys try to do that. Because the thing is just because it's close and because the bore centers are similar and that it will bolt on, guys are doing the LS heads on the 300-inch Ford also, but it's not exact. And so it takes some work. Some guys are cutting two heads and putting them together, but really to get it even closer, you would need to cut up 3 heads. And so that there's only the difference between this one and this one, and then this one and this one and this one and this one. You could take up the spacing and the gap in between those two and get it a little bit closer. Do you like bronze trunnions on LS engines? Yes and no. I recommend trunnion upgrades of any type, more because we get engines from the wrecking yard and they're really, really high mileage. And so if you have something that's already run to, or like my truck, 325,000 miles, if you have something that's already run that many miles, it's time to upgrade the rockers. At the very least, a trunnion upgrade. Seen Vice Grip Garage put LS rockers on a 318. I mean, I made a setup to put LS rockers on a Cadillac. I did it for one intake and one exhaust, and I'm thinking about making those mounts to do it because I think it'd be a cheap upgrade for Cadillac. The Cadillacs need different rockers, and the factory LS rocker is a really good rocker. It's lightweight. Guys run them to 8,500 all the time. They're lightweight. They're a good ratio. It's a good combination. But you have to look at what the distance is between the center line of the mounting hole and then where the tip is, and then where the center line of the mounting hole, and then where the push rod cup is, and see if where your rocker stud is mounted on another motor, small block Chevy, Cadillac, whatever. Does all that stuff work out? Because it's a lot more complicated than, I just changed to a 1:7 ratio or whatever. There's way more to it than that. Those are polls. 78% are saying are LS3 people. A couple more minutes. That looks like I probably need to go shave. We'll stand a little closer to the razor. I'd rather have a 6.4 Hemi. The Hemis are good. They got really good cylinder heads and good intake manifolds. And having a dual runner intake manifold is pretty cool. It's a good way to broaden the power curve. Why don't you like bronze trunnions? Is that question directed at me? Were you not paying attention when I just went over trunnion upgrades? Is a 4,000 stall good with a TSP stage 3 cam? That will get you into where the cam's making power. I don't know that much is necessary. And then what is the stall speed based on? Is it based on a 4.8? Is it based on a 5.3? Is it based on a 6.0? Because the torque that you're making is going to affect the stall speed of the converter too. Riley, on your question about the 7,000 RPM, if that's still a 6.2, you won't find something that's better than the factory LS3. A fast isn't going to do that, even with a mid-length runner. With a mid-length runner, take a look at the video where I did take a look at the big intake test video, and all the mid-length runner is going to do is lose power. That's something I'd rather go with used OE parts versus overseas replacement knockoff LS rocker arms. I've never done, I don't think I've ever put, I certainly have never bought a cheap knockoff rocker arm. I have put new GM ones on, but mostly I just use better used ones. Mike, you want a push rod dinosaur motor? I voted on this one with my dollar. I did an LS3. Sean, the 80-pound injectors are DECA injectors, DEKA. Lots of people sell them. Excel. I got mine from Excel, but a lot of people sell them. I'm making shift drum slider forks. Oh, cool. CL1 injectors would be fine, except when They roll over in the woods. Oil gets trapped in the Hemi and goes right into the cylinders and windows the block. You, I think maybe you're worried about the wrong thing there. Worrying about oil getting into them after you roll it over. We need to go back to the first thing. The first thing is the problem there. What head gaskets did you use on the Big Bang 6-liter? I used factory LS9 gaskets on the one that made 1,500 horsepower. On the other one, I think we used Felpros, and neither one of them did we have any sort of head gasket problem. Quite honestly, if you have a problem with a head gasket, you probably had a problem with something else. With any of those MLS head gaskets anyway. I'll still look at that. Am I still good to break in on the 42-pound injectors? Yeah, as long as the tune is right and it's not over fueling or being excessively lean, you can break them in with any size injector. You could break it in with 19-pound injectors if you're going to break it in on the dyno the way that we do it. Or better to get a new base tune. I don't know what tune you're using. Twin turbo Coyote owner. Also own a 5.3 and a 6.0. I think the Coyote is a huge breath of fresh air. It is different, and it's definitely going to be different than an LS is. It sounds different. Everything about it. Like I said, I'm not an LS guy. I'm not a Coyote guy. All of that's good, and you can make power with all of them. The old tune for my head scan. Sean, if you're just breaking it in and you're driving it under closed loop, it's all going to be fine. You're not, I wouldn't ever go to wide open throttle, wouldn't do any of that stuff. If you're just driving it around, under closed loop, and you're only doing very, very light throttle stuff during the break-in, none of that's going to be a problem. Rolling is totally commonplace for what we do. In your street truck, right? Yep, you need to get it to your tuna. And on that note, we're going to end our poll. Our polio. And we have one more minute. And I'm going to turn off. Don't particularly like your attitude. Guy thinks he's bright. Siemens Deca 80 EV1, the correct ones. I don't know what plugs you're using or anything, whether you have EV1s or EV6s. I don't know what harness you have and all that. But that's an easy thing to look up. The ones that I have are EV6. They're not the old like 5-liter Mustang Bosch style connector. They're not the square ones. Bill Hoskinson would really hate this conversation. He loves the old small block Chevys. I like the old small block Chevys too. I have a ton of small block Chevy videos up as well. That's the thing that a lot of people have a hard time understanding is that because we're talking about a Coyote, because we're talking about an LS, doesn't mean that we don't like small block Chevys or 1-liter Chevy Sprint motors or rotaries or 2Js or anything. Our focus on one thing during one day of the video of our live feed in no way makes it so that we won't talk about other things. That's what's the difference between a Coyote and an LS? I don't know. I suspect that an all aluminum LS3 with a composite intake would weigh less than a Coyote, but I don't know that that's actually true. I just think. Your stock injectors are EV6 plugs. Your stock LS3 or whatever you have are EV6s. At what power level would ARP headsets be necessary over stock torque to your yield bolts? Whenever I run boost, I put headsets in it. You don't have to. We've run boost on stock bolts too, but if I'm taking the heads off and I'm putting ring gap in it, I'm putting head studs back in it. And on that note, it's time to go. Got to go feed the doggies. I'll be back tonight. And so if you haven't, please go take a look at the video. LS3 versus Coyote. You get to pick one in the LS3, guys. I don't know, should be happy. We finally tested it, the Coyote against the marketplace competitor. So everybody should be happy. And we'll see. We'll see what happens with the comments.